The glass cracked when they opened it. A small shadow box, sealed for years, marked only with a date. Inside, medals no one in that building had ever seen, and a letter signed by a four-star general. There was no ceremony, no speeches, just silence, the kind that only comes when people realize they were standing next to history and never knew it. Before we go further, if you believe quiet professionals deserve their moment to shine, the ones who prepare in silence and rise when no one expects it, make sure to like this video and subscribe. Because this is the story of how one woman changed everything. She wasn't supposed to be in that room. Not then. Not ever. Clara Vance, 28 years old, sat behind a flickering monitor deep inside the U.S. Air Force Weather Command's Southern Analysis Wing, a name that sounded far grander than it felt. The wing was 3 rooms, 1 coffee machine that leaked, and a row of battered metal desks lined with terminals older than she was. Her job? Typing weather reports. Hundreds of them. Every day, civilian analysts like Clara existed in the spaces between recognition and obscurity. Every morning at 0600, she badged in, tied her dark hair into a messy bun, and slipped on her headphones. By 1800, she clocked out, forgotten before the doors even closed behind her. No one said her name in meetings. No one asked her opinion on forecasts. To most officers, she was the intern who never left, the quiet kid buried under satellite images, drowning in humidity reports and ocean current data. And she'd accepted that. Mostly. But there were moments, small, unspoken ones, when it stung. Like when Lieutenant Bryce Hanley, the swaggering self-appointed star of the wing, leaned against her desk one Monday morning, sipping burnt coffee, and smirked. "Vance, relax. You're not saving the world here. We track clouds, not launch codes." The others laughed. She didn't. She just nodded, typed faster, and buried herself deeper in her screen. Because what Hanley didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Clara had been seeing something for 3 days straight. A set of anomalies so sharp, so unnatural, they chewed at her like splinters beneath the skin. A heat bloom the size of a city forming in the Gulf of Mexico. Surface pressures dropping in unnatural patterns. Satellite wind tracks, bending where they shouldn't. She flagged it in the internal system, wrote up a note, sent it to her supervisor. An hour later, the reply came back short and dismissive. "Sensor malfunction. Move on." She stared at the screen, her stomach tight. She knew what bad data looked like. This wasn't it. But she let it go. Because at Weather Command, people like her didn't get listened to. The sun slid lower that evening, casting faint orange lines through the narrow office windows. The others were packing up, laughing about weekend plans, when Clara stayed at her desk, tapping through the models one more time. That's when she noticed it. The anomaly had grown, doubled in size. And worse, its center wasn't where it was supposed to be. Hurricanes didn't shift like this. Not naturally. She leaned back, heart thudding, chewing at her lip until her screen went black. At first, she thought it was a glitch, the entire terminal freezing. But then her badge scanner lit red. So did the wall phone. A siren, low and mechanical, sounded somewhere deep in the building. And then her phone rang. Not her supervisor's line. Not Hanley. Not anyone she'd ever spoken to before. The caller ID read, "PNTGN OPS/level 7. Her throat went dry. She picked up anyway. "Vance." The voice was sharp, clipped, and cold. A voice that didn't introduce itself because it didn't need to. "This is General Marcus Ellison, Joint Strategic Operations. Stop what you're doing and listen carefully." She froze, glancing around the emptying office as if someone would tell her this was a mistake. But no one came. Ellison continued. "You're the originating analyst on the Gulf anomaly file. We've reviewed your logs. We need your assessment now. Hurricane Ember briefing. You're on in 3. 3 what?" "Sir, I'm not." The line went dead. Clara sat there, heart hammering, staring at the darkened monitor. Around her, the last few analysts drifted toward the elevators, clueless. Hanley glanced back once, brow furrowed, as if half curious why she was still there, but said nothing. Within 30 seconds, 2 uniformed security officers appeared at her desk. No explanation. Just, "Ma'am, you need to come with us. Now." She grabbed her notebook instinctively, the one she used to track her own calculations when the automated system corrected results she didn't trust. The one filled with red-inked scribbles, cross-checks, and storm paths no one had seen yet. The elevator ride was silent. They didn't take her upstairs. They took her down. The door opened into a room she hadn't known existed beneath Weather Command. A cavernous, dimly lit space lined with screens 6 feet tall, each alive with rolling satellite footage and thermal overlays in glowing reds and golds. The air smelled like electronics and cold steel. Dozens of people she didn't recognize stood around a central table. Uniforms, badges, brass. At the head of the room stood General Ellison himself, square-shouldered, arms folded behind his back, staring at a looping image on the primary display. A swirling storm. Massive. Unnatural. Someone whispered the name. Ember. Clara didn't understand. That wasn't supposed to exist yet. Ellison turned sharply, eyes locking on her like radar lock. Vance. Yes, sir, she managed, voice dry. You've been tracking this longer than anyone. You've got the floor. The room stilled. The weight of 30 pairs of eyes settled on her. Hanley, she noticed, was among them, standing at the far edge of the table, expression frozen somewhere between confusion and disbelief. Her fingers clenched the notebook so tightly the edges bit into her palms. For the first time since she'd started here, every person in the room was waiting on her. And she didn't feel ready. But she opened the notebook anyway. Outside, the last traces of sunset faded, leaving the Gulf Coast bathed in darkness. High above it, a storm spun faster than physics had allowed before. Hurricane Ember was no longer forming. It was watching, and by the time anyone else understood, it would be too late. In rooms like this, silence isn't peace, it's pressure. Every second is a weight pressing down on the unspoken. And for the first time in her life, Clara Vance was the one holding the weight. The room smelled of cold steel and burnt coffee. Dozens of uniformed officers, analysts, and senior intelligence leaders ringed the central table, faces washed in the glow of satellite feeds stretching across the towering screens above them. Clara stood just inside the doorway, clutching her notebook against her chest. General Marcus Ellison didn't waste time on introductions. Vance, he said, his voice cutting through the hum of electronics. Step up. She hesitated for half a heartbeat, scanning the faces around the table. 2 admirals, a handful of colonels, people whose names were printed on the very documents she'd spent years buried beneath, people who'd never once known hers. Until tonight, she forced her legs to move, boots thudding softly against polished concrete, until she stood beneath the main screen. A satellite image of the Gulf dominated the wall, colored overlays pulsing as data streamed in. General Ellison folded his arms behind his back, eyes sharp. You've been tracking the anomaly longer than anyone. Give me your assessment. Clara swallowed. Her throat was dry. Sir, it's not behaving like a natural formation. A few chairs shifted. One man, older, silver stars on his shoulders, frowned. Define unnatural. Clara opened her notebook, pages filled with tight lines of red ink. The pressure drop rates aren't consistent with any historical hurricane patterns, she said carefully. And the storm's center has shifted 3 times in the last 12 hours, against prevailing wind tracks. A younger colonel leaned back, arms crossed. Maybe you're overfitting the models. The AI predicts an eastward drift, and those systems. Clara cut him off, her voice steadier than she felt. With respect, sir, the AI's wrong. It's pulling from the wrong dataset. The last 3 model corrections are based on corrupted inputs. The colonel's jaw tightened. Around the table, a low ripple of murmurs rose. Surprise, skepticism, maybe even irritation that a civilian analyst had just challenged a senior officer. General Ellison didn't move, didn't blink. Show us. Clara turned toward the console and tapped into the live overlays. Her fingers moved quickly, bypassing the default models and feeding in raw atmospheric data she'd logged manually. A different track appeared on the map. Gasps broke the silence. The projected storm path had shifted hundreds of miles west, straight toward Norwich Naval Base, home to the Atlantic Carrier Strike Group. Clara glanced at the timestamp. Landfall projected, 8:43 hours. Ellison stepped closer, his shadow falling across the screen. You're saying this storm is targeting the strike group? She hesitated, careful with her words. I'm saying, if the current trajectory holds, we'll lose every vessel tied down at Norwich within 9 hours. A heavy pause settled. Then, from the far side of the table, A sharp voice broke through. "General, we're taking unverified projections from a junior analyst?" Clara turned, meeting the speaker's eyes. Lieutenant Bryce Hanley. Of course he was here. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded smugly. The same half-smirk he wore in the break room now sharpened into something colder. "Sir, all due respect," he said, "but Vance runs surface-level data entry for atmospheric reports. She's never been cleared for tactical modeling." Clara's knuckles whitened around the notebook, but before she could speak, Ellison's voice cut him down. "Haley." "Yes, sir." "Shut up." The silence that followed was absolute. Ellison faced Clara again. "What else do you see?" She hesitated, tapping a few more keys. Thermal signatures filled the display, deep orange swirls inside the storm's eye, brighter and hotter than anything she'd seen in atmospheric records. "I don't know what this is," she admitted. "Surface temps shouldn't read this high without external interference." "External? As in?" one of the admirals asked slowly. Clara exhaled, steadying her voice. "Something's inside Ember. Generating energy. These aren't natural signatures." At the word "inside," the entire room shifted. An older intelligence officer leaned forward, speaking low. "General, we've been tracking unauthorized naval activity off the coast of Havana since last week. Unflagged vessels running encrypted signals. If they're using a classified weather manipulation system." Ellison raised a hand sharply, silencing the speculation. "We don't assume enemy intent until confirmed." He turned to Clara again. "Bottom line it for me, Vance." She glanced around the room. Brass, intelligence, operators, all watching her now. "If we don't reposition the Norwick group immediately," she said, voice steady, "you'll be calling families by morning." The words hung there like static in the air. General Ellison didn't flinch. He turned toward the room and spoke with the crisp certainty of a man used to obedience. "Strike Force Alpha. Full mobilization. Execute on Vance's track data. Move the group now." For a second, no one moved, as though they needed time to process the fact that a civilian analyst had just redirected a U.S. carrier strike group. Then the room erupted. Orders flew. Comms lit up. Analysts pulled live feeds, radio channels buzzed, command codes rattled down encrypted lines. Somewhere in the noise, Clara caught a fragment. "Evac authorizations confirmed, repositioning the fleet to safe coordinates." But amid the chaos, not everyone was convinced. Hanley, still sitting, shook his head in disbelief. "She's guessing. We're repositioning $2 billion of assets because an intern drew a red line on a map." Clara turned on him, her voice sharper than she'd ever let it be. "You think this is a guess? Tell me why the AI failed its last 3 validations. Tell me why a hurricane that should have stayed east has pivoted twice in 12 hours. Or better yet, explain the heat signatures coming out of the storm's eye when you didn't even notice them." Her words cut through the din, landing harder than she expected. Hanley opened his mouth, closed it again, and said nothing. General Ellison didn't even glance at him. "Lieutenant, you're relieved from this briefing. Get out." Hanley hesitated, jaw tight, before retreating, humiliated in front of the entire room. Clara didn't look at him as he left. She didn't need to. The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos. Strike Force Alpha rerouted. Norwick's fleet scrambled out of the harbor under emergency orders. Every model updated in real time, each second shaving precious miles between the carriers and the storm's path. But even as commands flowed and systems hummed, Clara felt a gnawing unease in her chest. Something didn't add up. She studied the raw satellite feeds again, tracing the signatures deep within Ember's eye. And there it was, faint, almost hidden. 2 perfect geometric heat anomalies, circling like orbiting stars at the storm's core. Not random, not natural, placed. She didn't say it aloud. Not yet, but the truth settled cold in her gut. Hurricane Ember wasn't just forming. Someone had built it. General Ellison stepped beside her, his voice low. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Clara shook her head slowly, forcing her expression neutral. "Just verifying." But she wasn't verifying. She was calculating. And what she saw next made her chest tighten. The system's auto-predictions, the same ones she'd bypassed, were feeding false data back into other commands. Strike Force Alpha wasn't fully out of Ember's projected path yet. The room thought they were safe. They weren't. Clara grabbed her notebook, flipped to the most recent coordinates, and rewrote the projections by hand. Her pencil ripped into the page as she corrected the vectors manually, her breathing shallow but steady. Then, without hesitation, she keyed Ellison's line directly. "General, we need a secondary correction, immediately." He studied her face for 3 silent seconds. Then he didn't ask questions. "Do it," he said simply. The new orders rippled out instantly, the fleet shifting course again. This time, Clara knew it was right. And for the first time since she'd walked into this room, the knot in her stomach eased, just a little. But she couldn't shake the final, chilling thought settling at the back of her mind. If someone built Ember, then someone aimed it, too. And if they were willing to weaponize the weather, this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. The operations center was silent now. Not calm, silent. On the massive screens above, Hurricane Ember churned across the Gulf like something alive, its swirling mass glowing with unnatural heat signatures. The storm had doubled in size overnight, shifting faster than the models could catch. Every mile it gained stole precious seconds from the men and women racing against it. Clara Vance stood dead center, notebook open, a pencil gripped between 2 shaking fingers she tried to keep steady. Around her, officers scrambled between stations, barking updates into headsets, while encrypted comms chirped and alarms pulsed faintly beneath the noise. She didn't look at them. She didn't look at anyone. Her eyes locked on the raw telemetry scrolling across her console. Something was wrong. Not with Ember's speed. Not with its path. With the data. The temperature curves weren't natural, they were being driven. Every new feed confirmed it. The storm's engine wasn't just warm water and bad luck. Something, or someone, had triggered it. Clara drew a slow breath, forcing calm into her voice. "General Ellison." He was across the room, leaning over a bank of displays, issuing sharp commands to 2 carrier groups. He turned when she spoke, his line face pale under the glow of monitors. "Talk to me," he said simply. She flipped her notebook open to the latest overlays, laying them flat on the nearest table. The anomalies inside Ember's eye? They're synchronized. Identical heat bursts at 12-minute intervals. That doesn't happen naturally. And look at the drift pattern. It's steering itself toward Norwich even faster than we projected. A low murmur rose from the cluster of brass around Ellison. One admiral frowned. "You're suggesting deliberate interference?" Clara didn't look up from the page. "I'm not suggesting it, sir. I'm confirming it." The first collapse. Before anyone could respond, the lights flickered. Every screen in the ops center froze, then went black. The hum of servers dropped into an eerie quiet. For 2 full seconds, there was nothing but the sound of muffled breathing. Then, beep beep beep. A warning tone blared from the ceiling speakers, low and insistent. "Mainframe's down," someone shouted. "All sensor feeds offline." Clara's heart dropped. The fleet was mid-evacuation. Without her data, they were blind. Ellison spun toward the IT commander. "Give me a bypass. Now." "We're trying, sir, but the system's been hijacked," the commander stammered, disbelief bleeding into his voice. "Someone's inside our network." It clicked instantly in Clara's mind. She grabbed her notebook and ran to the terminal cluster on the east wall, bypassing 2 locked stations until she reached one still alive, running off a backup circuit. Her fingers flew over the keys, pulling raw satellite pings from an unlinked archive. She muttered under her breath. "Come on, come on, come on." Hanley's voice cut across the room like static. She hadn't even realized he was still there, leaning against the far wall, pale but trying to sound smug. "Guess the Pentagon figured out your little guesswork game," he said, tone sharp with bitterness. Maybe the AI wasn't so wrong after all. Clara didn't look up, didn't break rhythm, didn't even acknowledge him. She routed power to her console, tapped into a secure NOAA uplink, and brought Ember's feedback online in patches. When the images reloaded, her stomach turned cold. The storm had accelerated, faster than physics allowed. Its projected track had shifted even further west, right on top of the secondary fleet repositioning corridor. If they didn't reroute immediately, Strike Force Alpha wouldn't clear the danger zone. She bolted to Ellison's side, notebook open, fingers stabbing the updated coordinates. "General, the fleet's still in danger. They're inside the corridor Ember's now targeting. We need to issue a second correction within 3 minutes, or they're gone." Ellison stared at her. 3 minutes. "Yes, sir." He didn't hesitate. He slammed his hand onto the comm relay. Priority override. Norcom. Strike Force Alpha. Adjust to Vance's latest coordinates immediately. The comm officer spun. Sir, without a verified feed. That's. Do it. Ellison barked, his voice ricocheting off concrete. Across the center, Clara's updated vector streamed onto the main tactical board. Operators typed furiously, scrambling encrypted codes to push the command downrange. The seconds stretched like hours. Finally, a response crackled back. This is Strike Force Alpha command. Acknowledged. Altering course. Engines to full. A heavy silence followed. Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. But Ember wasn't done. On the big screens, the thermal overlays lit up. The twin anomalies inside the storm suddenly spiked. Clara's jaw tightened. They're amplifying it, she whispered. Ellison turned. Say that again. Clara spun the heat maps, enlarging the pulsing signature deep in the eye. Whoever's controlling Ember just increased its energy output by 30%. They're pushing it faster, harder. Who the hell are they? A voice muttered behind her. Clara didn't answer. She didn't need to. The implication hung over the room like a storm cloud heavier than Ember itself. This wasn't nature. This was warfare. When seconds decide thousands. Then came the worst sound of the night. The soft, high-pitched ping of a geofence breach. Clara's console blared. Fleet within primary impact window. The numbers on her display dropped so fast it made her chest tighten. 743 HRS, 659 HRS, 612 HRS. General, she said, voice rising despite herself. We're out of time. Ellison's hand clenched into a fist. Options. Just one. She leaned forward, flipping to the back of her notebook. The page no one had seen yet. The page she'd been working on in silence since the first anomalies appeared. It was her failsafe, a route so unconventional, so narrow, that no one in the room had considered it viable. We cut them south, she said quickly. Through the Crescent Channel. It's shallow, but the supercarrier can clear it at flank speed. Ember's energy center can't pivot fast enough to follow. One of the admirals shot up in his seat, incredulous. That's insane. One wrong heading, and you'll beach half the fleet. Clara looked him dead in the eye, voice steady. Sir, if they stay where they are, you won't have a fleet left to beach. The silence was suffocating. Finally, Ellison nodded once. Do it. The narrow escape. Operators raced to relay the course correction. Across the room, officers leaned over their headsets, monitoring garbled updates from Alpha Command. Every second was a countdown against forces they couldn't control. Clara stood frozen at her console, breath shallow, eyes locked on the live radar suites. For 30 agonizing minutes, the fleet accelerated through the Crescent Channel, fighting violent crosswinds and 10-story waves crashing around them. And then, the lead carrier cleared. 1, then 2. Then all 8 vessels broke free of Ember's projected impact radius. The danger zone went red. The ships were already gone. Clara slumped forward, closing her notebook, finally breathing. Around her, the room erupted in relieved murmurs, some clapping shoulders, others collapsing into their chairs. But Ellison didn't cheer. He turned slowly, looking at Clara with something closer to respect than relief. You just saved 2,000 lives, he said quietly. She nodded, but her expression didn't match the weight of victory. Because her eyes were still locked on the heat anomalies inside the storm. They were still there, and they were moving, the shadow behind Ember. Hours later, when the immediate crisis had passed and the fleet was safe, Clara sat alone in the now quiet operations center. Most of the staff had cleared out, the adrenaline fading, replaced by exhaustion. She stared at the raw telemetry logs, scrolling frame by frame through the deep core anomalies. There were no errors, no corrupted feeds. The energy bursts had been real and intentional. She opened a restricted directory using Ellison's authorization code, pulling data buried behind 3 security layers. When she decrypted the last layer, her screen went black for a moment before displaying a single classified header. Project Stratus, Weather Intervention Capability, Unconfirmed Foreign Prototypes. Clara stared at the document for a long time, silent, her pencil tapping softly against the desk. So Ember hadn't just been a storm. It had been a message, and she had no doubt someone, somewhere, had just heard her answer loud and clear. A week later, Clara was back at her old desk, the same coffee mug, The same cracked monitor, the same flickering fluorescent lights above her head. Only this time, people knocked before entering her lab. Only this time, the general said her name. And on her desk sat a small, unmarked box sent directly from General Ellison. Inside, beneath a folded note, lay a single brass coin etched with 6 words. For the analyst who saw it coming. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't post about it. She just smiled softly, tucked the coin into her notebook, and went back to typing weather reports, waiting, watching, and ready. Because storms don't give second chances. And neither will the next one. Clara Vance didn't demand recognition. She didn't ask to be trusted. But when the world looked away, she prepared anyway. And when her moment came, she rose, not with rank, not with medals, but with clarity no one else had. She was typing weather reports. Until the day the general called.